Welcome to Amsterdam and KubeCon CloudNativeCon 2023. Join John Furrier, Savannah Peterson, Rob Strechay, and Joep Peascott as theCUBE covers the largest conference on Kubernetes, cloud native, and open source technologies together with developers, engineers, and IT leaders from around the globe. Live coverage of KubeCon CloudNativeCon 2023 is made possible by the support of Red Hat, the CNCF, and its ecosystem partners.
Welcome back everyone to CUBE's live coverage here in Amsterdam. KubeCon CloudNativeCon Europe 2023. I'm John Furrier, host of theCUBE. Got Savannah Peterson, got a lot of hosts, a lot of guests, a lot of great panels. This one is about the role of data, AI in DevOps, a lot of changes. We have Sanjeev Mohan, principal, and SanjMo, principal, analyst. He's been tracking the data space, and we had the two great guests here, Matt Butcher and Justin Cormack, on and back again, experts. Guys, data in DevOps, AI, future, ChatGPT is taking over the world. There's a company here that says they're the ChatGPT of DevOps. Provision some Kubernetes.
Yeah.
I mean, automation is, in a way, data.
Yeah, it is, and configuration is data, and generate, processing data and configuring data is kind of it's an obvious target. We've seen quite a few things in the last few weeks with people looking at that space.
Yeah.
Sanjeev, I want to bring you in because you've been covering this space aggressively, SuperCloud on our event, you got the data fabric. Data will be a disrupting enabler in the world with AI. Machine learning's been around. I mean, everyone's like, we've been doing machine learning for a long time, which is true. AI is just a reflection of that next evolution. What's the AI impact in your mind? What do you guys think about this AI strategy for DevOps? It's like, it's not ChatGPT, but it is intelligence, there's some automation there. What's the role of data in DevOps?
So I will say, data and AI, there are two major shifts that I see going on. The first thing with data is something that's very different from what we've been doing all this time. We've been talking about big data forever now, for the last 10, 15 years, but it's turning out that the data that you need, like you mentioned, configuration is data. A lot of data that we need is not really that big sometimes. Although your entire data set may be huge, but you really care about the most freshest, the most recent data. If that data is not too big, and I can train an AI model, and I can start doing some sort of like a research or analysis, I can do it on my laptop.
Yeah, and also, we kind of forget that in the 15, 20 years of big data, our computers have got much bigger.
Correct.
And so the size of the data often has got smaller.
I've seen benchmarks where the database has run at the same speed, if not faster, on an M1, M2 Apple Mac than a server. Mm-hmm. So if I can run, if the data size is not too big and the hardware is so advanced, maybe I should do my compute in an engine that everybody has, which is a browser.
Yeah.
How cool is that?
It is cool, and I think that we're seeing more and more hardware for processing data hitting laptops and phones because it's being driven by use cases like image processing for your photos on the phone.
Right.
Gets done in hardware, and then that hardware becomes available for all sorts of applications.
Right.
And I think the rise of real concern about privacy and personally identifying information is going to drive that forward, because a lot of the things we care about knowing are also things that require data that maybe I don't want to send somewhere else to have it stored in perpetuity, right? And so to be able to take smaller, well-defined sets of data and work on those locally, I think that's going to fill a big need for what.
So let me throw something out at you guys and get your reaction, because I think Dave Vellante and I have been talking about the SuperCloud concept for about a year and a half, but it's become more multi-cloud, but let's pull that aside for a second. If the developer experience is more productive, more compatible, run code anywhere, once, run anywhere, reusing code, you can almost imagine that's going to be better apps coming. So just assume that for a second.
Yeah.
With the cloud now in its teenage years, you got more innovation that's not like your classic ISV.
Yeah.
Look at Snowflake and Databricks. They're building on top of the hyperscalers without spending a dime of CapEx.
Yeah.
So no hardware required. Now you're running apps in the browser.
Correct.
With Awesome, and you have data and AI coming, the next level applications that will come out are going to look completely different.
Yeah.
If you assume that, what does it look like?
Yeah.
And how does it work? What do you guys think?
Yeah, and I think that's the thing that we have witnessed begin to unfold over the last 5 to 7 years. The cloud started as largely the simulation of the data center, which sort of started as the simulation of stacking a bunch of computers under your desk and plug them all together. And now that we have seen a generation of services evolve that were built for the cloud, it's time to start thinking, okay, well, now what's the next thing, right? How do we start building out from there? AI and machine learning is a good example because now we're starting to understand when we can lease somebody else's computing power and we can store vast amounts of data in there, we can build things very differently than when we have to pay for the hardware ourselves. And then we have other things where then we start saying, well, wait, some of this we have to move back closer to the user, and that means we have to rethink a lot of the architecture that I think we're building.
I think it's been really interesting, in the development of, it's a decade of containers this year since Docker launched, and I remember, a lot of the questions early on were like, oh, are people going to run a database in a container? And then it turned out that actually suddenly, the question, that wasn't the important question. The question was like, oh, I'm moving all my databases to a cloud provider because I don't want to run a database at all because there's no upside. All that could happen is I could lose my data, and there's just downside. Now we're seeing a kind of third phase, which I think is the really interesting thing for this conversation, is an explosion of new tools around data and new ways of doing things. We're seeing SQLite and DuckDB for local data processing. We're seeing people thinking about, we're seeing Cockroach and kind of new databases that are just distributed from the start. We're seeing a huge amount of innovation in the data space. We're seeing almost, a vast majority of apps have some data, caring about data. They're not if you look at the 12-factor app thing from the beginning of containers, the one about data is the one that doesn't really apply anymore because never store data anywhere near our application doesn't make sense with an application that's all about data and you want to do data processing. All the other 11 factors still look kind of okay, but that's those data architectures have made those two jumps, one to the cloud and one to, oh, okay, data's so important, we're going to have to think about this again now.
It's a next-gen conversation, what you're having.
I see two super interesting trends, things that are happening from the front end and the back end. So the front end is how data consumers are getting the data they want to do the business decisions. Today we spend a lot of time creating these reports and dashboards, and something is never right. You always need that extra piece of information, but with the AI coming into the picture now, what if I can ask, I'm a business user and IT doesn't anticipate what my needs are. What if I can ask a question on a model that's trained on my institutional data? So reports, dashboards, apps, I think in a few years they'll be gone. We'll have this interactive Q&A kind of a thing. That's at the front end. Now at the back end, something even more interesting is happening. How we kind of changed the whole application space with microservices? I think that's coming to the data, in my opinion.
In what way?
So it's called data products. And this year at theCUBE, I mentioned that I see data products, which is a sort of a self-contained, tangible piece of code and data together. So now a data product is it's an API access to some pieces of data, so that becomes like a microservices. So to your point, Justin, that is how we are going to co-locate data and apps together.
Who consumes the product, the developer or the application?
So it could be any data consumer. It could even be a DevOps engineer. A DevOps engineer wants to configure a system or wants to somehow monitor or test it. So instead of going directly to the database and writing a SQL statement, they go to a data product. a data product could be for a business user, like a supply chain, for a retailer. So,
what do you guys think about
Or
that?
it could feed, I mean that's the thing, as well as like, there's data products for people to look at, as you say, but there's also data products to feed back into systems themselves. So it's like a product that optimizes your pricing is a data product, but it doesn't feed back to a person who changes the price. It changes the price for you and optimizes your pricing directly because you want to have that level of control and feedback built straight.
You've got observability, he's got data.
Yeah.
That's going to change with AI.
Yeah.
More code's going to come in.
I think machine learning here is the interesting new variable in this equation, right?
Correct.
I think for a long time, going straight to one of the points you made, right? When we were thinking about how do I organize my data, and then how do I query my data?
Correct.
Organization was all about formatting everything in the right, we're breaking all the pieces apart and we're putting each one in its little box and we're going to shove it into a database. And then we're going to index it, and but it was all very oriented around the data types and the coder's ability to structure that data into little chunks that the computer understood, right? Then SQL was all about saying, and here's a language that I as a human can learn to try and make some sense out of the data in there.
Right.
Well, the cool thing about where ML is going is that both pieces of that equation are starting to look different, right? We've learned to be able to feed data and the model into the model and have it figure out what the relationships are, and then the query language becomes chat, right?
That's the prompt.
Spoken word.
This is what I wanted to get to.
Yeah.
Thanks for bringing that up. That's exactly the point. I couldn't figure it out, but you just said it. Data on data. So organizing data was a decision not made by developers. That's a fact.
Yes.
Right.
Correct.
Database people.
Correct.
Yeah.
Infrastructure people. Oh, it was storage. How do you flip that script? What's in it for the developer? How does a developer develop with data? And then how do you organize the data if on behalf of the developer productivity? Because this prompting is showing us that data is interacting with data. That's like code.
Yeah.
It is like code, and
So
you have to
code on
start
code.
doing code-like things with it. I mean, like, there's very different flows involved once you've got data. You have to start, you're building models and you're testing them and you're refining them and you're, there's a whole separate set of processes that look like what you do with code, but they're kind of also different in a sense as well. But you've got to be, you've got to think more like a scientist about is the world still the world it was when I built my model last week?
Yeah.
Has something changed and this is no
more
longer
cars
working?
and more colors. There's more cars and more colors.
Yeah.
But this is happening right now. This is new.
Yeah.
This is a new phenomenon.
We're living through yet another one of those change moments, and that's the model. We've always kind of had the notion of model, I think, but we were very stringent about it. I think of a database, the DDL for a database is a model, but it's primitive and it's
very slow moving. It doesn't change. You don't change it very often because it's hard.
And so you're turning all the knobs and dials to tweak it. Now with machine learning, we have to build models and then trust that the model
Object store unstructured database is growing up into a monster. Right? I mean, that's what's happening here.
And that was Justin's point, really, is that if we lose, we like the tight grain control, the fine grain control over what the model looked like. But now we're starting to see the power of using an ML model.
And this is the challenge.
The trust is the issue we don't have.
Yeah, that's what I mean by experiments and is this working for me now? And does it, you no longer have the, I wrote this, I understand every line of code in this. It's like, I fed this data and it told me this was the answer today, and I want to be very sure that the kind of answers it's giving are still right and that it's not doing
the
things
S-bomb is what?
Yeah. You dropped the S-bomb on the show now.
Had to get it out there. Drinking game, everyone take a shot.
So it's using the ML to do the work, but it's also not just to create the app or the model, but to also retire it. In the data world, we've been really bad at that. So in the application side, we write the code, we version control it, and we treat it like a product. We get rid of it when it's not used. On the data side, we just create a new data model. So there's a new request. The DBA or the developers, the designer says, sure, I'll create you a new data mart. That data mart sits forever. The machine learning model sits forever. And this guy has run off to do
All
the
right, so I'm going to ask you a question.
Yeah.
But first, we agree that the data for developers is now upon us. That's going to be figured out. It was the early days. No one has an answer. That's job one. ChatGPT, this is a question for the industry analyst who's got all the bases covered. What companies are going to be disrupted by ChatGPT? If that goes its course, name the companies. Is it Snowflake? Is it like Teradata? Who is get disrupted by ChatGPT? If you assume now developers are going to flock to a model where you got data fusion, for lack of a better word, or data that's more robust and programmable.
So John, depending upon who you talk to, you'll find out either ChatGPT produces pristine code or it screws it up. You know? So you get
just like a human.
So my point is that I don't see any company like Snowflake and the database companies getting disrupted at this point. Maybe they'll change, but to me, ChatGPT.
I don't know about that.
Yeah,
come on.
We don't know. But ChatGPT is an amazing way to get started, but not to finish the job. For that, you still need that expertise.
I think Snowflake would be disrupted because the lock-in point you brought up about WebAssembly is interesting. Now, data can't be locked in. If you lock in data, then you use all the benefits of machine learning.
Correct.
So you have to assume that. Snowflake's going horizontal across clouds.
Yep.
But you got to use their fabric.
Correct.
Right? So you're locked into Snowflake, right?
It is true, yeah.
So, does that help or hurt the future of the AI, or is it doesn't matter because they can talk to another model?
So when I first, last year we had Snowflake Summit and then the Databricks Summit. I'm going to say something which it may be a bit controversial, but when I look at what Databricks does, you put all your data in an open format, Apache Parquet files, on an object store with a common interface, maybe it's S3, which is now everybody supports S3. So that data is not locked in. But when you put it in Snowflake, it goes in the proprietary format, plus Snowflake will do micro-partitioning, clustering, anything and everything to improve that speed. So there is a difference, but Snowflake has a massive ecosystem. Everybody is moving. In fact, I would say cloud data warehouses today have become the clearing house of all compute activities.
There's no doubt, Snowflake is a great cloud data warehouse. And I think, being a cloud data warehouse means you're like managing data at scale, right?
Yeah.
The question now comes back to the developer. You mentioned Salesforce in our last interview.
I think one of the questions is, is the developer going to be programming in Snowflake all the time, or are they going to? I think things like Parquet, again, that's part of the really exciting parts of the data tool set now, that we're getting all these tools that are designed for, sharing data between applications, easily writing applications against data, and like these formats are becoming really important for quickly building new applications that use data. And I think that I think it's hard to kind of ignore those things, but you need to get stuff out of Snowflake because you're going to need it all over the place in order to write applications that are pervasive, use data pervasively.
I have to say, people who are watching this are already up in arms because they're like, no, wait, how can you say Snowflake is locking in my data? Because Snowflake can go to external files as a table using Apache Iceberg. Or Hoodie, or
I'm already getting hate texts from Databricks as well. Since we brought up Databricks, we'll end with the comment around tool chain, because WebAssembly, which we were just on, which I wanted to bring you in, we couldn't have enough chairs, but tying it all together, I think WebAssembly points to the future, and it's in its own North Star of, we want to have compatibility around coding and code so that developers don't have to do stuff repetitively and make their jobs suckier. And want to make a great experience for developers and be productive. That's unequivocally a great North Star. When you apply it to these tool chains that out there that are proprietary or tied into, say, Databricks tool chain, you're tied into their AI by default on the tool chain. So what's interesting to me is, maybe that's a good thing, maybe that's a feature, not a bug, if there's a WebAssembly-like mindset in data.
So if you can run WebAssembly in your Snowflake database, like and things like that. Those are definitely options that make it easier to write applications there, portability. And I think that those are the kind of use cases that the security models designed for with WebAssembly and the extensions for performance and so on. That kind of take your code to where the data, your biggest data is. It makes a lot of sense from the data gravity point of view. Just
if I can write a highly performant application in C++, compile it to WASM, and run it in my database, that is far better than what happens today. Today, you write it in whatever language you want, then it goes to this translator, it translates it into SQL, because databases, there's no SQL.
Yeah.
If I can avoid that and have a binary format, go ahead.
And there's an expense component to that too, right? Because you're pulling the data out of the database, which requires pulling it over the network, often incurring, then you're consuming compute resources here, churning through all the data, then you're putting it back in.
Correct.
To be able to run that code inside the database instead of out here means we're saving money, we're much more efficient. And
you can do more local optimizations around what code actually
dramatically
needs to run.
simplifying the tooling and the experience. Guys, we are putting on a clinic here. We've identified that AI answer is not yet clear, but we're starting to get signs of visibility into the areas. It's all
patterns are bubbling up.
Making things easier, faster, reduce the times it takes to do steps. And the database, I mean, maybe it's database-less world we're going to be moving to. Got serverless, why not have database-less?
So what is the way when people say, what is serverless? So the way I define it is when you think of servers less. Because servers are there, but you don't think about it. So the database less would be where the end user is not like worried about, is it an Oracle or Snowflake or Teradata, but it's there.
Well, we got to end it there. We're getting the hook here. They're going to pull the plug on us. They are. I'm getting yelled in my ear by Leonard. Gentlemen, thank you so much. Sanjeev, thanks for coming on,
so
bringing the analyst perspective, laying out the landscape. It's really the confluence of a really great time. If you're a developer, open source is booming. The opportunities just laid out today, some entrepreneurial opportunities, the white space to innovate, tons of action, just great stuff. Thanks for sharing. All right, we'll be back more with live coverage here at KubeCon in Europe. We'll be right back.